I was wanting to speak a bit about some subtle energies that we may or may not be aware of that are operating forces within our world that I've observed and have personal experience with, and wanted to share a bit from that perspective. And these energies to me occur like subtle parasites in the sense that their only purpose is to get energy from you. That's not to feed you, it's not to raise you up, it's not to give back to you, but it's actually to take from you. And in taking from you, or manipulating you, or convincing you in some way to follow it, to give it your vital life force, it your attention, it pulls you into its world with it. So how I've observed these subtle, they're so subtle, these subtle operations happening. And what I see as the portal to these parasitic energies that operate through people. They operate through the psyche, and I'm not suggesting that people are aware that this is happening or that they're hosting these forces. Just that it operates through guilt and shame, especially shame. So when we become a scapegoat at an early age, it isn't uncommon in some way to be groomed by the family, by the adult, to start taking on the emotional and psychological burdens of the hidden stuff of the family. So when we play a game like and again, I want to just say that these dynamics are not necessarily operating overtly and are seen and are known. These are often very covert, very subtle, nuanced ways that they arise within us. And in these moments, we allow ourselves to be taken somewhere else. We, in a way, if we want to think about integrity and us staying in our integrity would be this idea of a boundary. If we want to look at it like an energetic boundary, and we think aura, bubble, the skin would be a boundary for the organs, whatever that boundary is for us energetically, these parasites can get through. These energetic energies know exactly how to get through the boundary system to be able to vibrate or touch something that is like an open wound or sore, to be able to pull that energy back into their world, back into that vibration. Where I see the biggest help being for us being groomed as scapegoats, and for anyone really in the world, is to relearn our sacred no. Why this is so important. A few years ago in a holotropic breathing session, Mother, the Virgin Mary, Mother Mary came to me And in that session, she gifted me with the word or the term that I'd never heard before at that point, with the sacred no and this importance of the no with the energy behind the no. And when we think that, like the skin, things can't get through, right? It has a natural no to the outside, keeping the integrity of the inside or the purity of the inside intact. In the same way, our no for us invites a difference of frequencies in our inner kingdom and the outer kingdom. Now, on another level, it's all here, it's all present, it's all inside. We're all part of that. There's not any separation, right? So I'm going to walk through, in a way, an idea of playing in these fields of, in this case, the inner and the outer, and energetic integrity. And so when we do not have a no in our vocabulary, meaning we've been manipulated out of our power to stand in our right to choose, and also to own all of the impact of our yes and our no. So our response ability has to do with what we say yes to, what we say no to, and the impact of that in our inner universe and in the outer. When we desire to say no, and yet we allow it, we create energies like betrayal. We've betrayed the truth of ourself and our desire for this thing for something else. And a lot of us know what that's like, to have, for all the reasons that make sense, say yes to something when really we want to say no. And the fear associated with the no, the feelings of loss or our needs not getting met, death, some survival is often why we split, and we're not in integrity with the truth of our yes and our no. And then that splitting of our energy, of the truth of ourselves in that moment, creates a distortion. We're not in alignment. And if we don't reclaim that for ourselves and become able to a different version, a different reality, something else, realign. If that's a sin and we missed the mark, then we're reorienting and doing it again, right? But what we're not doing is we're not carrying the guilt, we're not carrying shame, right? We're not carrying the guilt of doing something wrong or bad and then making that have meaning against we're bad and personalizing that, which is often the attunement for the scapegoat that they've been made to carry the burden of the I am and the bad together. So we're working out of the dynamic so that these energies that we start to see operate all around us, where other people become a part of the spiritual lessons that we learn as we grow in our own integrity, where they will not, again, I'm not speaking to anyone doing something intentional, nor am I speaking to even an awareness of these operating within them, that even if we were to say you're possessed by something, there might be a complete denial, because our desire has to be greater to know and see truth than it is to stay asleep in unconsciousness that leads us further and further into a sense of self-isolation, where what is the fullness of self becomes very reduced, and we feel the tension and the pain, maybe suffering, of what feels like loss, and also survival, right? When we're in the abundance of self, when we are in the knowing that all is given and there's always more, and that the gratitude is the key in all of this, and we live from these places of frequencies that are self-fulfilling and allow a certain expansion of consciousness to happen, then we start to recognize the subtleties of when we move into reduced states of consciousness, and we seek to release ourselves from the reduced states of consciousness so that we liberate ourselves from the suffering that's created often. If we believe in past lives, it could be for past life related. If we see that all is available now in this life, that past life is an idea and a concept as well, and that it's all accessible through now in this moment, we can look at that and heal or realign that now without the idea of where that came from in past versions of ourselves. So however you desire to look at that, now is this access point or this portal into all. And so when we start watching others use, often covertly, utilize psychological techniques to covertly be met in their pain and suffering, because they themselves are unable to own, to be able to respond to their own inner states, they seek attention from outside and create certain kinds of drama that can pull us in, especially if we're sensitive to those from our own childhood, especially if we have dynamics that within us want to save people from their own suffering. If we look at people from our own innocence, we see the innocence of the child within the other, and yet we're unable to see the adult present there that is or should be parenting their own inner child, and that's their responsibility to do that, right? And hold the parent accountable to their inner child and to the suffering of their child as we do that for ourselves, right? The suffering, whether we call it inner child or the idea of separation within us, there's so many different frameworks that we could look at that all in some way point to this idea of separation within ourselves. So some of these might sound familiar to you. I'm personally not clinging to any one of them. So when we have people in our lives who have monologues, where they have stories that involve you, but they haven't actually done the work to get into your world, either by one just coming up and directly validating the validity or lack of validity of their story, or to meet you as a human being and ask you, honor you, respect you, and find a dialogue where an openness of flow can actually happen, and with a desire to actually learn, and with an open heart be able to see where we're withholding from ourselves connection by the story we've created about the other that actually isn't serving either one of us in togetherness, in union, in love, in sacred relating, and in just being another human being, right? And and even relating in the struggles of, being another human being in this world without adding to the burdens of another with our own stuff. So we can check out what's our stuff before we bring it to the table with another. And if we're bringing it to the table of another, to still hold with humility the story we've created and put at the feet of the other with humility. Here's the story that I've created that I'm holding. Please help me to see something different, right? These kinds of acts are helping us to move out of these lower frequencies that are actually manipulating and taking from others. Because at the moment that I create the story about you, and then I hold you to that story, and I'm not allowing you to be anything else other than what I say you are, I'm in my own world now. And actually, you're not even present for me. I'm in my own story. Your value and worth is only valuable to be able to validate that this is right or this is right. And often, even if we bring evidence to relate to the story that we're holding over another person, where our pride is such that because we have emotions around this story, it means something to us. The righteousness of the story and being right has more value than the humility of the connection. And the humility could just be like, it's tough to be a human being, isn't it? With all of these ways that we have grown up, with all of these family dynamics, with all these ways that culture will want to inform us about who we are. And who am I in truth, in love, and how to unravel ourselves in all of these different paradigms, and to be able to find coherence and unify the polarities so that we are operating within integrity, right? As within, so without, as above, so below, so that it's all present here now, where we've unraveled ourselves from time, that we can live in an eternal now, where our creation is renewed in every moment. Who we are as a person and personality is constantly in flow and flux, and there's not any rigidity to that, as life itself is what it is. So to see how we are pulled into vibrations that, when we're attentive, we can see that others are not healed. They're not aware that they have these things coming out and pulling at us, desiring us to play a role. Hey, I need you to be my father so that I can be healed. I can see the dynamic, so it can agitate enough in me that I can become conscious that I'm creating this thing so that I can heal it, right? So we find somebody who's similar, and then we do this dance, and then we create this thing, and so we can see it. When we get more astute with how we project, why we project, what's the value of projecting, and we start to reclaim our projections, we start to see how much that hurts to withhold from others love, affection, care, consideration, and also how others want us or even need us to play, and how we might even be conditioned to play. the savior. When we can see the other is suffering from their own self-delusion, from the creation of their own world, of their own mind, and the lack of accountability to what it is that they're thinking and creating that they want to involve us into, to be that thing so they can validate the story when we stop playing, when we see it, and we honor ourselves, love ourselves, honor the other in their story, and we let them have that without us taking any of that on. We free both of us from playing. Now, that doesn't mean that the other won't try harder. That doesn't mean that that parasite in them really wants to feed and create some drama so it can get its needs met. It's really important that we see these things just as simply as they are, right? It wants to pull us to a vibration that doesn't serve actually either one of us, because the one who is under the influence of that parasite in that moment doesn't want that either. Their heart most likely wants to have connection and care, and just in that moment they're unable to meet that because they're hijacked by that story that is needing reconciliation, and by the guilt and shame that's driving why it can come up. And so when we do the work of reconciliation within ourselves, self-ownership, self-accountability, so we're really talking about sovereignty here, right? And in a way, instead of creating in the world with distortions, we reabsorb the world, which may seem like death, but it actually turns into stillness within us, where we can observe a lot more clearly for ourselves that what the playing field that's out there, and make choices. We can see that the other actually wants to rattle us. They want us to bite. They want us to play in a way that actually is, if we did, would be betraying to our own integrity. It would be other-serving, not self-serving. And when we start to see that these subtleties are being played all the time, we can start to watch that people really don't know what it is that they're doing, or what they're driven by, or what their deepest desire and motivations are. But somewhere that neediness for connection, for something, because they're starving in that place, is being asked. When we can see that we don't have to play, and that doesn't mean anything about us. We don't have to have a judge within ourselves, like, oh, I'm abandoning them if I don't go after them or do that thing, which means us abandoning ourselves, right? Like, oh, I don't have to save them, right? Like, spirit within them knows how to do that. And if it's not us, love loves each one of us so much that love will find another person to put in their lives that can do that. And we stay in love. So as we stay in love, and we're going to recognize that there's no starvation for love. Love's everywhere. We are not needing to save people from themselves. And then that meaning that we leave or abandon ourselves in any way. We are able to stabilize ourselves in a frequency that's more aligned, and we vitalize ourselves there. So as we get to see all of these different ways that these parasites come out of the closet, out of the host, pulling and biting for our attention, creating scandals and drama, often from shame and guilt, then we see that that's right. We have a choice. More and more, we have a choice to stay in love, to allow things to be as they are, see that probably what's going to happen is that they're going to do A, B, C, D, E. That's right, because that's what somebody who's possessed is going to do, right? And allow them. That's their walk, that's their lesson, that's right. And others will ultimately have to look at how we allow wolves in sheep's clothing to come and determine and talk to us. And how in a way these parasites are actually wolves in sheep's clothing that feign a certain victimhood, and yet they're the victimizers. And when people stop playing and see people's distortions as they are, you watch how they're made to be the victimizers versus the victims of the parasitic attachments from the host that is not responsible for their own energies, for what they're creating and what they're distorting and what they're destroying and what they're not in unity about, which is their own energies within themselves. So they're in chaos, desiring to create more chaos when you are the container for the chaos. When you are that sacred no, you become the space, but not the contents. All of this is arising within each one of us. So being able to hold ourselves with all of this arising and love in all of this. Allow, hold, and not be moved. Not be lowered, but to invite by staying firmly rooted in your vibration. You invite all others to rise with you. And at some point, those who have eyes to see and those who have ears to hear will see that the wolves in sheep's clothing are indeed victimizers and are in deep senses of psychological victimhood. We're leaving that. Thank you so much for being with me.